A very good afternoon to the panelists present, the chairman and the chairman of the session, C.A. Subham Khaitan, and the member of ICASA. So, starting with the presentation, today I made an initiative, rather taken an initiative to present my paper on GST pertaining to the topic place of supply, its concept, relevance, and issue. So, GST came into existence on 1st of July 2017. So, this day marked a paradigm change in the indirect tax regime of the country. So, on this particular day, GST was adopted, which happened to be a big transition from the pre existing era of CST and excise based taxation. So, the key ingredients of GST happens to be its destination based taxation model and a dual model. So, dual model basically means that both the state and the central government take equal part in determination of law and its execution. So that's taken care by the GST Council, which meets on regular interval to take care of different issues pertaining to GST. So the second key pillar happens to be its destination-based taxation model. So that's a key thing pertaining to the topic I am speaking on. So destination-based taxation model, unlike the pre-existing origin or production-based taxation model, you know, make sure that the revenue accrues to the state in which the actual consumption is taking place. So what used to happen in the when the GST was introduced, it faced a stern opposition from the producing state in the sense that these people had given good amount of incentive to the business houses in the form of subsidy and grants to set up their factories and industries in their states. And now when the destination based model is coming up, they are losing on the revenue because they expected that when they produce they will gain the revenue. So they face the GST, this model faced a stern criticism from this producing state. However, they were assured by the central government that they will be compensated for any loss of revenue for a period of 5 years since the initiation of GST. However, as on date, when we find that this different states when they are going on and in catching upon that promise, they have been turned back by simply stating that the recent turn of even happens to be an act of God, and they simply have to come back. So that's it. Moving ahead, we realize that location of supplier and the destination based taxation cannot be look differently. They have to go hand in hand to understand the intricate principles lying within. So we understand that when we were adopting the destination based taxation model, uh, the then finance minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, in an informal interview stated that instead of looking at destination-based taxation model as a loss of revenue to the producing state, we should look at it as a catalyst or rather an incentive to the industry houses in a sense that this would enable them to reduce the cascading effect of taxes and in a sense would increase their working capital, which will ultimately result in increase in their revenue, increase in their working capital facility, the capital, which will result in increase of income and further job opportunities in the economy. So it is a long run phenomenon, which was said by him, and it would take some certain amount of time, to unfold its benefits. So, when we go ahead to understand the place of supply principle, we need to understand that how goods are differentiated from services in determination of place of supply. So, there are few points which I need to reiterate. In case of goods, there is a physical trial which is available. You can trace where the actual movement is starting and where it's ending. So there is nothing which can be hidden easily. But in case of services, it's kind of difficult to predict who the actual consumer is. And if that guy is not registered under GST, it becomes a bit difficult, and the supplier can mold the transaction as and when he wants it. Okay. Okay, and for supplying of services, if you go through the different verdicts or directive of the GST Act, you'll find that it's not necessary that services, has to be given from a fixed location. It can be provided from while on the move. So billing criteria can be a bit of an issue when it comes to when the services are given on the move. So moving ahead, so I will be dealing with the issues pertaining to determination of place of supply. when both the supplier and the recipients are in India. So the first case which I'm going to take up is when the supply involves movements of goods. So as per the directive of the Act, the place of supply shall be the place where the movement of the goods terminates. Okay, so this is a fair and simple principle. However, when we add on to it a scenario of build to ship to model wherein goods are transported from one place to another, I mean to the recipient location at the request of a third party, which happens to be a buyer, then the place of supply will happen to be the registered place of business of the buyer. So this principle takes care of two facts. Now let's say that the buyer happens to be in a state of West Bengal and he doesn't have any registered place of business in a state of Maharashtra where the actual movement of the goods terminates. Okay, so when the bill is being raised, it won't be having IGST because had the transaction been the place of termination, yeah, so the IGST would have been raised. But in this case, CGST and SGST would be raised, and ultimately the buyer would be able to avail of the credit. Okay, and also in the sense that we take an example, like in case of a seller who is not registered under GST because he doesn't reach the threshold limit for registration. So what happens is, since he has not taken registered under registration under GST, he doesn't engage himself into interstate transaction. Because as soon as he engages himself into interstate transaction, what happens is he has to take compulsory registration as per the directive of section 24. Okay. So let's say he comes into contact with a buyer who wants his goods to be transported to Mumbai, though the buyer registered in West Bengal, right? However, this happens to be a once in a blue moon transaction, and he may not be willing to take up that transaction because as soon as he takes up that transaction, he will have to obtain registration under GST. So this requirement of the industry was taken into account before framing this principle of build to ship to model, which aids to both the requirements of the seller and the buyer in the aforesaid scenario. Moving ahead, when the supply doesn't involve movement of the goods, so this will be the place where, as in wherein basis, where goods are installed or they are rendered available to the buyer. Moving ahead, when the goods are supplied on a vessel or a conveyance. So, in case goods are supplied over a conveyance, the place of supply shall be the location where goods are taken on board. So, you know, it is seen that various airlines have registration all around the country to ensure that they don't lose on the credit part, and of course, it becomes kind of easy for them to manage the GST. So that's how the industry has adapted to cope up with the requirement of the GST law. Moving ahead, so I am going to deal with the determination of place of supply in case of services when both the supplier and the recipient are located in India. So, this section 12 has a specific general rule wherein it states that if the place of supply cannot be determined by the aforesaid mentioned parameters, what you can do is this, the place of supply can be the location of the person receiving the services. In case that's not available because you don't have the address, or if the person is not registered under GST, then the place of supply will happen to be the location of the supplier. So in a case wherein the supplies of services are made to a person which is not registered under GST, it becomes kind of easy for the supplier to mold a transaction into CGST, SGST, or IGST as per his requirement. And at the end of the day, the revenue or the government will end up losing on the GST collection. And moving ahead, when we talk about services in relation to an immovable property, so in this case, the place of supply will happen to be the location of the immovable property. So this case has to be read with has to be seen along with the resistance faced along in the industry. So let's take a scenario wherein we have a CA firm in West Bengal which renders audit services and consultancy service. So this CA firm gets an assignment in the state of Maharashtra, and it has to send in its manpower over there for a period of, let's say, 15 days. So what happens is these people, this manpower, go and stay there for, let's say, as I said, 15 days. So they stay in a hotel, and this hotel generate billing in the form of CGST and SGST because both the location of supplier and the place of supply happens to be in Maharashtra. So this CGST and SGST is of no use for this firm because it doesn't have registration in the state of Maharashtra. So technically, this credit is of no use to him. So this issue was raised in the 25th GST Council meeting, wherein they stated the grievances of the industry pertaining to this practice. Because what used to happen is this this directive of the law happens to be against a person which has a registered place of business in one state and provides services across the nation. So this was the case. However, it has been seen that many mid-size of bigger firms do have their place of business in different parts of the country. Let's say a CA firm has its main business in the state of West Bengal. However, it has small offices in the state of in other states, and it has a small office in the state of Maharashtra, wherein two or three people are there. So whenever a big assignment comes in, the CA firm sends its manpower from the state of West Bengal to take care of that assignment. So what happens is when the billing is done for that hotel bill, they will give the GSTN number of its Mumbai office so that the Mumbai office can avail of the credit. Now, we need to understand how this goes against the requirement of the act, because in case of GST, the Mumbai office and the Kolkata office are two separate legal entities. It's not like income tax, wherein doesn't matter how many offices you have around the country, you have to file only one income tax return under a single pan. But in case of GST, they are treated as two different entities, right? So this practice, which is, I have seen being adopted across the industry, goes against the requirement of the law. And I believe that coming forward, the GST Council will take up this issue and will resolve it in the interest of the economy. So, moving ahead, in case of training and performance appraisal services, in case of B2B supply, uh, the place of supply is the location of such person. However, in case of B2C supply, what happens is the place of supply happens to be the place where services are actually performed. So this requirement of the Act actually provides that the GST accrues to the destination of supply, which is perhaps the major principle on which the act is based. However, in case of absence of location or performance of services, uh, what happens is the services are in case where the service is rendered via a virtual means, you cannot determine who the actual recipient is and what is the actual place of supply. So it becomes a kind of difficult issue to determine where the actual consumption takes place. And it has been seen that the supplier of services, are able to, mold a transaction in a way that they are able to get hold of the requisite GST as per their requirement. So, moving ahead, in case of advertisement services to the government, so the government has laid down that in case you have a memorandum of understanding, GST will accrue across the state as per the memorandum of understanding to which it is rendered. However, in case there is no such memorandum of understanding, the government has given out a set of rules and principles to determine the place of supply, and accordingly, the GST will accrue to those states. Moving ahead, okay. So herein, I will talk about place of supply in case of services wherein either supplier or recipients are located outside India. So here also we have a general rule wherein if the place of supply cannot be determined on the basis of parameters laid down under the Act, so they have a general rule. So general rule is applicable only if the service doesn't fall into the place of supply as provided in section 13. So the rule provides that the place of supply of service is the location of the person receiving those services. However, in case if that's not available because that person may not be registered under the GST, so the place of supply happens to be the location of the supplier. So let's consider a transaction wherein services are provided for the repair and maintenance of our goods or maybe its upgradation. So the place of supply shall be the location where the services are actually performed. However, we may have a scenario wherein these services are performed via electronic means. Then the place of supply will happen to be the location where goods are situated at the time of supply. So, this directive of the Act makes sure that the revenue accrues to the state wherein the actual consumption is taking place. So this is at par or rather in line with the requirement or the framework in which the law was made. Okay, so Section 13 further makes it clear that if services are in the nature of goods and individual related, immovable property related, then what will happen is the revenue will accrue to each of the states wherein services are rendered. And in case we have a non-taxable territory in the picture, wherein to which the services are rendered, the revenue or the supply for consideration of supply, that non-taxable territory would not be considered. So this is to make sure that the revenue, I mean, doesn't get reduced and it's available to the within the taxable territory in India. Okay, so let's take a scenario which faces a kind of resistance from the industry. So in this scenario, we have services supplied by a banking company or let's say NBFC to an account holder. Uh, let's consider a scenario that the account holder is situated in a non-taxable territory. Okay. However, the requirement of the law provides that the place of supply will happen to be location of supplier. So this bank is situated in India, let's say Maharashtra, and this person is situated in the state, this unregistered person is situated in the country of Dubai. So what happens is, even if the transaction is in the nature of international transaction, this bank cannot charge IGST on the same, on the simple directive of the law. So it has to raise bill in the form of CGST and SGST, and this transaction becomes an intrastate transaction, and which could have been easily an interstate transaction. And of course, this uh, this NBFC or banks do generate revenue from those services in the form of foreign exchange. So they don't even get the benefit of zero rated supply, which is available in case of export of services. Because as per the definition of export of services, we have that the recipient of service should be located outside of India, and the place of service should also be outside India. So this criteria number C is not being met because of such directive of the Act, and industry veterans are in talks with the government to ensure that this issue is being resolved, and they do get the benefit of export sales. I mean export of service and term the transaction under the head zero rated supply. Also, moving ahead, we have a case of IODR. In case in this scenario, where the place of supply happens to be the location of the recipient. However, let's consider a scenario wherein the recipient doesn't happen to be registered under GST. So what happens is this IODR guy will have to take compulsory registration in India for the purpose of collection of GST and its payment to the government. So I mean this requirement of taking a compulsory registration ensures that the revenue accrues to the place, which happens to be India, where the consumption is taking place. So, towards the end, I would like to mention that GST, since its introduction, has gone through a numerous change to adapt itself to the changing law requirement of the economy and the changing business environment. So this model of destination-based taxation plays a critical role in determination of place of supply, and all the principles are devised keeping in mind this destination-based taxation. And this act has been able to cope up with the requirement of the changing economy, though over the years it hasn't given the kind of revenue which it was expected of it, because of course of the legislation and lack of compliance on the part of the taxpayer. But it is believed that this destination based taxation model will give favorable returns to the government and also to the economy in the long run, because it's based on the principle that if the economy grow, ultimately the government also increases its revenue, so it doesn't have to depend on increasing its tax rate for the purpose of increasing its revenue. So this is how I would rest my case on this paper. I hope you understood and like my presentation. Thank you.
Anand, Anand, you looked very relaxed and natural, to be honest. What I could see from your face, you were not stressed out at all. You, as if this is your regular practice that you speak on, even though I know it isn't. but this is something which I could see that it's very relaxed, very natural, and the only thing you can work slightly on is your voice modulation, is where to actually emphasize, where to not emphasize. So that aspect you can perhaps work on slightly. And in between, you used to use fillers which you can avoid, because I know you have a very good vocabulary, to be honest. You could use words in natural senses. I could feel that you have not memorized the words and you've tried to use it as if you wanted to enhance your vocabulary. The way you could speak, it was very natural. So what you can do is avoid fillers like I mean, moving ahead. I mean, with every sentence, if that happens, that becomes slightly difficult for the audience, because I know you have all the vocab words which you can use, and you can make your presentation as good as it can be. I feel that you can become a really wonderful speaker and you have a lot to achieve. Small little improvements, small practices, and I can see you going, I mean, I can see you becoming a wonderful speaker, to be honest. The way you could speak in such a relaxed way, everyone could feel that, okay, this person, the way he's going about it, it's really nice. And we are feeling as if this person is somebody who can take any topic and put it in simple words for everyone to be able to grasp the topic. Just one bit of information which I would like you to work on is that your presentation has too much information. So what you can have is your presentation should have bullets. Like in one bullet, there can be 6, 7 words. And perhaps your examples which you are taking, there are a lot of examples which you took. So what you can do is perhaps have the provision written in very brief words, like 7 to 8 words, which you know what is the provision. The audience does not need to read the provision, because if a slide contains 20 lines, then as an audience, if I'm listening to you, I start reading the presentation more than listening to you. So I would rather want to focus on your bullets. Like if you want reading the first bullet, then the example right next to it, because you took a lot of examples. Those examples, since I was feeling as if you're trying to frame them while you speak, rather than having the examples framed in your mind earlier. So if you have the examples already framed and it is written in your presentation, it would help a lot for the audience to understand, okay, this person is the location of supply, this is the place of supply, what should be the answer. Audience will think about it. They would not have to think about, okay, what is the example, let me understand it again. So that way, if your example is written in the presentation, that would help a lot, right? So out and out, to be honest, I am seeing that all the three presenters have been exceptional, to be honest, and there have been very few aspects to set apart all of them.